I need to tell you something that I have never said in exactly these words before. In 40 years of emergency medicine, I was present for the deaths of more than 400 people. Not all of them. I want to be accurate about that. Many of the patients I treated survived. Many recovered and went home and lived years I never witnessed. That is the good work. The work you do so that people leave the building the same way they came in, through the front door, on their own. But some did not leave that way, and across 4 decades, across more than 400 deaths witnessed at close range, in the specific, unvarnished, often chaotic setting of an emergency department, where the end, when it comes, does not wait for the room to be prepared or the family to be assembled or the words to be found. I began to notice something, a pattern, not a medical pattern, not a clinical finding that belongs in a journal or a textbook, a human pattern, the kind that accumulates slowly in the background while you are focused on the medicine, and then one day arrives in the foreground and asks to be looked at directly. What I noticed was this: the last 10 minutes of a person's life, when they are present in them, when consciousness is still there, and the body has not yet made its final determination. Those 10 minutes almost never contain what a person spent their life treating as important. They contain something else entirely, something so consistent, so reliable, so unvarying across every background and income level and kind of life I witnessed, that I stopped being surprised by it somewhere in my second decade and started being instructed by it instead. I have been thinking about whether to tell you what that something is, and I have decided that the most honest thing I can do, the most useful thing, the thing I owe you if you are going to spend the next several minutes with me, is to tell you exactly what I saw. Because what I saw changes things. Or it should. And I want you to have that chance. The chance to be changed by it. While you still have the time to do something with the change. What the room looks like. And what it doesn't. Let me describe the room first, because the room matters. An emergency department is not the kind of place that prepares itself for death. That is not a criticism. It is simply the nature of the environment. The ER is designed around the premise of intervention. Every protocol, every piece of equipment, every system in the room is oriented toward the possibility of reversing what is happening, of buying more time, of finding the option that keeps the person in the bed alive for 1 more hour, 1 more day, long enough to make the next decision. When death arrives in that environment, when the medicine has done what it can do, and the body has made a determination that medicine cannot override, there is a specific quality to the room that I do not know how to describe fully, except to say that it changes. The urgency drains away. The noise level drops, and what is left is something quieter and more real than almost anything else I have experienced in 40 years. The things that were urgent an hour ago are no longer urgent. The professional titles, the schedules, the unresolved obligations, the things that need to be addressed before the end of the week, none of them are in the room anymore. They are out in the world somewhere, waiting. The way all of those things wait with complete indifference to what is happening in here. What remains is the person. Just the person. Stripped of every layer of identity that the world had placed on them. The job title, the income, the reputation, the carefully managed image of a life. And what is underneath all of that? What was always underneath all of that is something very small and very essential and very human. In 40 years, I watched that essential thing surface in people who had spent their entire lives keeping it buried. I watched men who had not cried in decades cry. I watched people who had spent years estranged from the most important people in their lives say names with a tenderness that made it clear the estrangement had never reached as deep as they had allowed it to appear. I watched the performance of a lifetime fall away in the space of 10 minutes, and reveal what had been beneath it the whole time. And what was beneath it, every time, was not what the person had spent their life building. It was who they had spent their life loving, what they reached for, every time. I want to be specific, because I think specificity is what makes the difference between something you hear and something you carry. In 40 years, I watched more than 400 people enter the final window of their lives, and across all of them, across every age, every background, every kind of life that ends in an emergency department. The pattern of what they reached for was so consistent that I eventually stopped filing it away as individual observation and started understanding it as a fundamental human truth. They reached for people, not things, not achievements, not the evidence of what they had built or accumulated or accomplished. People, specific, named, irreplaceable people who had been present in their lives and whose presence they needed in that room. I watched a 62-year-old retired contractor, a man who had spent 40 years on job sites, who had the hands and the posture and the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had never once asked for help. He didn't absolutely require. I watched him spend the last clear minutes he had, asking, with an urgency I had rarely seen in any patient, for his daughter, not his son, not his business partner. His daughter, a young woman he had described in an earlier conversation as the one who called every Sunday. The one who knew to call every Sunday because he had made her feel, across her entire childhood, that Sunday was the day he was reliably there. She came. She made it in time. I was in the hallway when she arrived, and I watched her walk past me with the specific purpose of someone who is not in a hospital, who is simply going to her father because that is where he is, and there is no other possible place for her to be. She was in the room with him for about 20 minutes before he died. I do not know what was said. What I know is that when she came out, she was holding herself in the particular way of a person who has received something hard and necessary and real, not broken, but changed, carrying something new. I watched a 58-year-old woman, a high school principal, a woman who had run a large institution, with the kind of competence and authority that left no visible room for uncertainty. I watched her, in her final lucid period, ask one of my nurses to find her husband. Not dramatically, not in desperation, just with a quiet directness that was entirely consistent with who she apparently was. She said, "Is my husband here? Could someone tell him I'd like him to come in now?" He came in. He sat beside her and took her hand. And she looked at him, this composed, authoritative, entirely capable woman, and she said, very simply, "I just wanted to see your face." Just that. I just wanted to see your face. Not a speech. Not a list of things she needed him to know. Not the complicated emotional accounting that people imagine must accompany a final conversation. Just, I wanted to see the specific face of the specific person who had been most present in my life one more time before I couldn't anymore. I watched a 71-year-old man spend his last conscious minutes asking about his dog. I mean that with complete seriousness. He was not confused. He was clear, oriented, fully himself. He had a dog, an 11-year-old beagle named Chester, who had been with him since his wife died 6 years earlier. He wanted to know that Chester would be taken care of. He asked his son, who was in the room, to promise. And the son promised, and the man visibly settled. Some tension in him released that nothing else in that room had been able to touch, and he died about 40 minutes later in a state of something that looked, from where I was standing, very much like peace. The dog was not a sentimental detail. The dog was the living representative of the 6 years of companionship and routine and non-judgmental presence that had held this man's life together after his wife was gone. Promising that the dog was safe was, functionally, promising that the thing most representative of the love he had been receiving and giving was going to continue to be honored. People reach for love. In every form it is taken in their life, in every container it is found. Not once, not in 40 years, not in 400 people, did anyone reach for their career, for their net worth, for the status they had accumulated, for the opinion of people who had never truly known them, for any of the things that had occupied most of the hours of most of the days of their lives. Just the people, just the love, just the specific, particular, irreplaceable human connections that no amount of achievement could replicate and no amount of loss could fully erase. What they said and what they didn't say that they needed to. The words are the part I want to spend some time on, because the words are where I saw the most consistent and most instructive pattern of all. In the final lucid period, when a person still has language, when the capacity to form and deliver a sentence is still present, there are two kinds of words. The words that come and the words that cannot come fast enough. The words that come first are almost always names, just names. A husband, a wife, a child, a parent, a sibling, a friend from 30 years ago who drifted away but whose name is still there, still available, still the first word that surfaces when the ordinary filters are gone. After the names come the sentences, and the sentences, across 400 people, across 40 years, fell into a pattern so clear that I could have written it down in my 2nd year and returned to it in my 40th and found it unchanged. They said, "I love you," in every variation, with every degree of ease and difficulty, with every accent and vocabulary and history of saying it or not saying it that a human life can contain. They said it directly. They said it in forms that meant it without using the words. They said it with a look, a hand held out, a name spoken in a tone that required no sentence around it, because the tone contained everything the sentence would have. They said, "I'm sorry," for specific things, named things, particular things, the things that had been left unresolved for years or decades, and that arrived at the final accounting, still waiting. A father apologizing to a daughter for something that happened when she was 17. A man apologizing to his brother for a fight that had cost them 15 years of closeness. A woman apologizing to her daughter-in-law for years of coldness, rooted in a fear she had never named out loud before that moment. They said, "Thank you," often for things that had never been acknowledged as things that required thanks. The ordinary, daily, unremarked acts of care that one person had provided to another across years, and that had been received, mostly, in silence. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for raising our children when I wasn't there to do it with you. Thank you for calling every Sunday, even when I answered in ways that didn't deserve the call. And sometimes, not always, but often enough that I noticed it and kept noticing it. They said something that was harder to witness than any of the above. They said, "I should have said this sooner." 4 words, carrying the weight of every conversation that had been prepared and postponed, every moment of sufficient love that had been swallowed because the moment didn't feel quite right, or because the other person seemed busy, or because saying it out loud felt like a kind of vulnerability that could wait until there was more time and a better context, and less chance of it being awkward. I should have said this sooner. I heard that sentence, or a version of it, more times across 40 years than I can count. And every time I heard it, the thing that struck me most was not the regret in it, though the regret was real and present, and sometimes devastating to witness. What struck me most was the implication it carried, The thing underneath the sentence that the sentence was pointing toward. The words were always there. The love was never the question. The people knew what they felt. They had known it for years, sometimes for decades. The love existed, fully formed, in the interior of the person. It was not waiting to be discovered or developed. It was already there, complete, real. What was missing was not the feeling. It was the saying of it, the decision to put the feeling into words and deliver it to the person who needed to receive it, in ordinary time before the final 10 minutes arrived and made every other consideration irrelevant. I should have said this sooner means I had this to give you the whole time, and I held it, and now I am handing it to you in a hospital room with 10 minutes left, which is the hardest possible way for both of us to receive it. The man who couldn't say it, and what that cost. I want to tell you about a specific person, because I think the specific is more instructive than the general, and I have been general long enough. His name, I'll call him Walter, was 69 years old. He was a retired high school football coach from a small city in central Ohio, the kind of man that the word solid was built for. Quiet, capable, economical with words, the product of a generation and a geography that had a particular and very specific relationship with emotional expression, which is to say, not much of one, not from cruelty, not from indifference, from the particular cultural formation that told men of his era and his background that restraint was strength, and that what you felt was demonstrated through what you did, not through what you said. Walter had 3 sons. He had coached 2 of them in high school. He had been a consistent, demanding, deeply invested father in all the ways that could be observed. He was at every event. He made every decision with their futures in mind. He worked the hours he worked and made the sacrifices he made with the explicit understanding that everything he was doing was for them. What he had never done, what his formation had made almost physically impossible for him, was tell them, not in words, not in the direct, unambiguous language of a father to his son that deposits something specific and permanent in the account. He had shown it in every way available to him, except the one way that would have made it unmistakable. He came into my department on a November evening with a cardiac event that was serious and fast-moving. His wife had called 9108. His 3 sons, all adults, all within an hour of the hospital, were notified and came. There was a window, about 30 minutes, in which he was conscious, alert, himself. His sons were in the room. I watched from the doorway, giving the family the space they needed while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. I watched what happened in that room. His sons were there. They were physically present. They were standing close to his bed with the particular posture of men who want to do something and cannot find anything to do. One of them had his hand on his father's arm. The other 2 were on the far side of the bed. All 3 of them were looking at him with the expression of people waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to know what to do next, waiting for their father to be the one who said whatever needed to be said, because he had always been the one who knew what needed to be done. Walter looked at his sons, and I could see, from where I was standing, that he had something to say. The specific quality of a person who is holding a sentence, the particular stillness of someone who is about to speak something they have been carrying for a long time. He opened his mouth, and then he closed it. He looked at the ceiling instead. His son, the oldest, the one with his hand on his arm, said very quietly, "Dad, you can say it. Whatever it is, you can say it." The face of a man who had spent 69 years holding things in the way that his world had told him was right and strong and appropriate. That face did something I had seen it do to other men of his generation. In rooms like this one, across many years, it broke. Not dramatically, not with noise, quietly. The way things break when they have been under pressure for a very long time and the pressure is finally released. He said, "I'm proud of you, all three of you. I should have said that every day for 30 years, and I didn't say it enough, and I need you to know it." His voice was not steady. It was the unsteady voice of a man saying something that had been waiting for decades to be said, and that his body did not quite know how to carry out of him cleanly. His oldest son put his head down. The youngest, the one standing furthest away, took 2 steps toward the bed, and then stopped, and then covered his face with his hand. Walter survived that night. He recovered, went through cardiac rehabilitation, and lived for several more years before dying of unrelated causes. But I have thought about those 30 seconds in that room many times since, about the sentence that had been available to be said for 30 years and was not said, about the sons who had grown up receiving the evidence of their father's pride in every form, except the one form that would have made it undeniable, about how much work the receiving of those words required, the way his youngest son had to take 2 steps and then stop, because the body needs a moment to process something it has been waiting for, without knowing it was waiting. Those words were there for 30 years. They were in Walter the whole time. They just needed to be said. What the last 10 minutes remove, and what they leave. I want to explain something clinical, not because the clinical is what matters here, but because understanding it makes what follows more precise. In the final lucid period before death, something happens to the human mind that I observed across 400 people, and that I have spent a great deal of time thinking about in the years since I stopped being in those rooms professionally. The things that ordinarily compete for a person's attention, the obligations, the concerns, the professional pressures, the social performances, the long list of things that feel urgent in an ordinary day, and that fill the foreground of a person's mental life, they fall away. Not gradually, quickly. The way a room empties when someone pulls the fire alarm. Everything that was happening in there exits at once, and what remains is the structure underneath. The bones of the thing. And the bones in every person I witnessed were the same. Love, connection, the specific people and relationships that had given a life its meaning, not its success, not its productivity, not its external shape, but its meaning. The interior of the thing. What it had actually felt like from the inside to be that person, in that life. The last 10 minutes are ruthlessly clarifying. They remove everything that was not essential and leave only what was. And what was essential in every single case, across 400 people, was not anything that the culture had told them was essential. Not the career. The career exits quickly. I never once saw a person in those final minutes express concern about how their professional legacy would be perceived, about unfinished work projects, about the state of their industry or their field. The career was simply gone, not mourned, not referenced, just absent. The way things that were never actually load-bearing become absent when the real structure is revealed. Not the money. The money exits just as quickly. Not one person in 400 looked toward their financial situation in those minutes. Not with pride, not with regret, not with any reverence at all. The money, which had occupied so much of the working life, was simply not present in the room at the end. Not the reputation, the carefully tended public self, the image, the persona, the accumulated social capital of a lifetime. Gone. In its place, in every case, something much simpler and much more real. A person who needed to be told they were loved. A person who needed to say they were sorry. A person who needed to hear a specific name one more time from the right voice. What remains in the last 10 minutes is the relationship inventory. Who did I love? Did they know it? Did I show up for them in the ways that actually mattered? Did I say the things that needed to be said while I had the ordinary time to say them? Or did I hold them so long that I am saying them now, here, with the clock visible, which changes the quality of everything? Those are the only questions in the room, and the answers, the specific, personal, this particular life answers, are what determine whether the last 10 minutes are characterized by peace or by a particular kind of urgency. That is the hardest thing I have ever witnessed. The urgency of someone trying to cover, in 10 minutes, the ground that 30 years of ordinary time was supposed to cover and didn't. The ones who were at peace, what they had done differently. I do not want to leave you only with the urgency, because the urgency is not the complete picture. Across 400 deaths, there were people who arrived at the last 10 minutes without that urgency, who were in the window with a quality that I can only describe, having now spent considerable time trying to find the right word for it, as settled, not resigned, settled, not giving up, done, in the specific, earned sense of a person who has done what they needed to do and is not leaving important things undone. I want to tell you about those people, because they are the instruction, not the cautionary tale. There was a woman, I'll call her Dorothy, who was 81 years old when she came into my department. She had lived alone for several years following her husband's death and had, by all observable evidence, made an excellent and deliberate life of it. She came in on a Thursday afternoon, and she died the following morning. And in the hours between, she was one of the most remarkable presences I encountered in 40 years. She was not afraid. I want to say that clearly, because it was observable and clinical, and not my interpretation. Her vitals, her affect, her communication patterns were all consistent with a person who was not in the grip of fear. She was something else, something that I initially struggled to name and eventually arrived at. She was curious. She was approaching what was happening to her with the specific, open, slightly tilted head curiosity of someone encountering something new and interesting, rather than something terrible. Her daughter and 2 grandchildren came in the evening. Dorothy sat with them for several hours, talking, laughing at several points, telling stories that the family clearly knew and received with the warmth of people hearing things they love, for what might be the last time, but who are not devastated by the receiving, because the stories have been theirs for years. I spoke with her briefly late in the evening, when her family had stepped out for a few minutes. I asked her, and I acknowledge this was not a clinical question, but I asked it anyway, whether she was frightened. She considered the question with the same care she appeared to give everything. Then she said, "No, I think I did what I was supposed to do. Not everything I wanted to do, but what I was supposed to do. I told people I loved them. I tried to be there when people needed me to be there. I made mistakes, and I apologized for them, and I tried to do better afterward. I don't feel like I'm leaving anything so important undone that it would be worth being frightened." She paused. "The things I didn't finish, the book I never wrote, the trip I never took, those don't bother me much. Those were nice ideas. The things I couldn't afford to leave unfinished, I finished. That's what I keep coming back to." I thought about Dorothy for a long time after that conversation, about the specific distinction she had drawn between the nice ideas and the things she couldn't afford to leave unfinished. The book, the trip, the career ambitions that didn't fully materialize, the projects that ran out of time. Those were not in the room with her at the end. What was in the room was her daughter, her grandchildren, The evidence, visible in every interaction I observed, of a woman who had spent her life making the people around her feel like they were the most important thing, not through grand gestures, through the accumulated, daily, ordinary practice of actually showing up. Dorothy was 81 years old and she was settled, because the things that matter were not unfinished. That is the instruction. Not a list of life achievements to complete before a deadline, not a bucket list or a legacy project or a dramatic restructuring of priorities. The instruction is simpler and more sustainable than any of that. Finish the things you cannot afford to leave unfinished. Say the words. Make the call. Repair what can be repaired. Show up for the people who need you to show up while they still need you to. Leave the relationship inventory clean, because that is the inventory that is visible in the last 10 minutes. And the quality of what is in it is the difference between Dorothy and the urgency I described before. What witnessing 400 deaths changed in me, and what it didn't. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think honesty is what makes anything I say worth saying. I have just described to you a pattern that I observed across 40 years and more than 400 people. A pattern about what matters at the end of a life, about what the last 10 minutes contain and what they don't, about the relationship inventory and the difference between people who arrive at the end with it clean and people who arrive with it incomplete. I observed that pattern. I understood it. I believed it, with the complete conviction of someone who had seen its truth demonstrated across 4 decades and hundreds of lives. And I want to tell you what it changed in me, because the answer is both more and less than you might expect. It changed the way I spoke to patients. I became, over the years, a physician who made time for the things that were not strictly clinical, who understood that what a person needed in those rooms was not only the medical intervention, but the human presence, and who tried to provide both. I became someone who paid attention to the family as carefully as I paid attention to the patient, because I had learned that the family was part of what the patient needed most. It changed the way I thought about death, not philosophically in the abstract, but practically. I lost, somewhere in my second decade, the particular discomfort around death that many physicians carry and that can make them less useful in the moments when usefulness matters most. I learned to be in the room with it, to hold it without flinching, to be a steady presence in an unsteady situation, which is one of the most useful things a physician can be. Those are the things it changed. What it did not change, and I tell you this because I think it is the most important and the most difficult thing I can say on this channel, is my own behavior in my own life. I watched Walter struggle to say, "I'm proud of you," to his sons, and I understood, in that moment, that I had spent years not saying the equivalent to the people in my own life. I watched the school principal ask to see her husband's face, and I thought of Margaret, who had been asking me, in her quiet and patient way, to come and sit with her. Just sit with her, without an agenda, without one eye on the department. For years before I managed to do it, consistently. I watched Dorothy, and I recognized, with a clarity that was not comfortable, that I was not on her path. That the relationship inventory I would have presented in those years would not have been clean. That the things I could not afford to leave unfinished were not finished. I saw all of it. I understood all of it. And I still came home some nights and checked my messages before I sat with my wife. I have told you about that before, and I will not repeat all of it here. But I think it bears saying in this context, because the context is specifically about what the last 10 minutes reveal. And what they reveal is not only what the dying person failed to do. They reveal the gap between knowing and doing that exists in almost every human life, including the lives of people who know better than almost anyone exactly what the cost of that gap is. I knew. I still had the gap, The gap did not close until Margaret was diagnosed. Until the diagnosis made the time finite in a way I could not ignore or defer or file away under things that would be addressed when the urgency finally cleared. I am telling you this so that you understand. Information is not sufficient. Witnessing is not sufficient. Understanding is not sufficient. What is sufficient is decision. The repeated, daily, renewable decision to act on what you know, to let the understanding travel all the way from your mind into your behavior, into your choices, into what you actually do on a Tuesday evening when you could do the thing that matters, or the thing that is in front of you. I am asking you to make that decision, not once, repeatedly, because the decision does not hold itself. It has to be renewed. Every day it has to be renewed. Your last 10 minutes, and what you want to be in them. I am going to ask you to do something that requires a particular kind of honesty. The kind that is easier to avoid than to practice. The kind that most people manage to avoid their entire lives by staying busy enough that the question never surfaces long enough to demand an answer. I am asking you to imagine your last 10 minutes, not as a morbid exercise, not to frighten you, or to produce the specific anxiety of a person staring into something they are not ready to look at, but as information, as the most accurate possible diagnostic tool for whether the life you are currently living is pointed in the direction of what you actually want. Because the last 10 minutes are a mirror. They reflect back, with complete accuracy, the choices that have been made across the entire life. They cannot be managed, or curated, or selectively edited. They simply show what was built, and what wasn't. In your last 10 minutes, if you were granted the kind of clarity I described, the window that opens sometimes and gives a person full consciousness and the ability to say what needs to be said, who would be in the room? Are they people who would be there because of who you have been to them? Who would arrive because being in that room with you is simply what they do? The continuation of a relationship that has been genuinely tended for years, not the performance of obligation. Or would there be people who should be in the room who are not there? People whose distance from you is the accumulated result of years of something being left unsaid, or years of their needs being treated as secondary to other things, or years of a relationship being taken for granted in the specific way that stable things get taken for granted. What would you want to say? Is there an equivalent of Walter's sentence? Something that has been true and real and present in you for years, that the people who need to hear it have not heard in the clear, unambiguous, no room for interpretation way that they need to hear it? Is there an apology waiting? Not the kind that arrives wrapped in justification and context, the clean kind. The kind that says, I was wrong, and I know I was wrong, and I am sorry without qualification. Is there a thank you that has never been said for something that deserved to be acknowledged for years and wasn't? Because acknowledgement requires a level of attention and intention that the busyness of an ordinary life makes easy to defer. Is there someone you have been meaning to forgive? Not for their sake, but for the sake of what the unforgiveness is costing you in energy and attention, and the specific weight of carrying something that was never yours to carry indefinitely. These are not rhetorical questions. I am asking you to actually sit with them, in whatever private space you have, without the usual defenses, without the postponements and the not now laters, and the genuine belief that there will be a better moment. There is no better moment than the one before the last 10 minutes. The last 10 minutes are too late for some of this, not all of it. Walter's sons received something real in that room, and it mattered, and they will carry it differently than they would have carried its absence. Something in the last 10 minutes is better than nothing. But some of what the last 10 minutes call for cannot fully land in 10 minutes. Some of it requires the ordinary time, the Tuesday evenings, the Sunday phone calls, the quiet conversations that do not have an occasion because they do not require one. The practice of saying the things that need to be said on a regular enough basis that the people who need to receive them as the ongoing evidence of how you feel rather than as a final deposit made too late to compound. Dorothy was settled because she had been practicing for years. Walter had what he had because he had held it for decades. Both paths are available to you right now, today, in the life you are currently living. You are choosing one of them every day, whether you intend to or not. 3 things. That's all I'm asking. I don't want to leave you with something that feels too large to act on, because that is the enemy of action. Big lessons, broadly stated, tend to produce a feeling of agreement, and then a return to the existing pattern. Nothing changes. The insight lands, and the life continues. I want to give you 3 specific things. 3 things that if you do them today, not next week today, will move your relationship inventory in the right direction. Will add to the account. Will make your last 10 minutes slightly more like Dorothy's, and slightly less like what I saw in the hardest rooms. The first thing is this. Say the unsaid thing. You know what it is. There is always one, usually more than one, but start with one. The thing that is true and has been true, and that the person who needs to hear it has not heard in clear, unambiguous language. Maybe it is pride. Maybe it is love. Maybe it is gratitude for something they have been doing for years, without ever being told that you see it and it matters. Maybe it is an apology for something specific that has sat between you and someone unaddressed for longer than it should have. Say it, not in a text message, not in a card, in your own voice, to their face or on the phone. The real medium of a real human being talking to another real human being, without the buffer of written words that can be misread or ignored or filed away without being fully received. Say it today, before you sleep tonight, before the next ordinary day begins and fills up with the things that feel more urgent than this, and aren't. The second thing, be in the room you are actually in. Tonight, when you are with the person or people who matter most to you, be there. Not the version of there that has one eye on the phone and one on the face in front of you. Not the version that is physically present and mentally in tomorrow's meeting. The actual thing. Full attention freely given to the person in the room with you. For 1 hour, just one. Without the phone. Without the background hum of everything else. The kind of presence that the school principal was asking for when she said, "I just wanted to see your face." The kind that Margaret was asking for when she said, "I need you to actually be here when you're here." The kind that your person is probably not asking for explicitly anymore because they have learned not to ask, but that they are still at some level below the adaptation, hoping to receive. Give it tonight. The third thing. Call the person you have been meaning to call. You know who it is. The person whose face came to mind somewhere in this conversation. Not because anything has happened, not because an occasion requires it, but because the fact of their existence in your life is reason enough for a phone call. Parent, sibling, friend. The person from 20 years ago who still occupies space in your memory, in a way that tells you the relationship was real even if the contact has drifted. Call them, not to say anything in particular, just to be in contact, just to let them know, through the simple act of dialing and waiting and speaking when they answer, that they are on your short list, that they are the kind of person you call for no reason, which is the only reason that really matters. 3 things. Done today. They will not complete the work, The work is longer than today. The work is the practice of a life, the daily, renewable, never fully finished practice of tending the relationships that give the life its meaning. But they will start it, or they will restart it, or they will deepen it. And the starting is what I am asking for. Because in 40 years of watching people approach the end of their lives, the ones who arrived with something like peace were not the ones who had done everything right. Nobody does everything right. They were the ones who had started, who had practiced, who had made enough deposits in the right accounts, across enough ordinary days, that the account was not empty when the moment arrived. What I want you to remember from this room: I have been in this room, this specific kind of room, where the last 10 minutes happen, more than 400 times. I have watched people I did not know become, in those minutes, the most nakedly real version of themselves. I have watched the performances end. I have watched the carefully maintained structures of a lifetime fall away in the presence of what is actually coming. And what I have never watched, not once, not in 400 times, is someone regret the love they gave. I have watched people regret that they didn't give more of it, that they held it when they should have offered it, that they let it sit unexpressed in the interior of a life that ended before the expression arrived. But I have never watched someone wish they had loved less, said it less, been present less, given less of themselves to the people who needed them, not once. The love is never the mistake. The withholding of it is the mistake. The deferral of it, the assumption that it is known and does not need to be said. The belief that showing up occasionally is sufficient when what the people you love need is the practice of your presence. Regular, unremarkable, no occasion required presence. That is what I want you to carry out of this conversation. Not the deaths, not the urgency, not the weight of what I have described. Though the weight is real, and I'm not asking you to set it down entirely, because a certain weight is what produces the movement. Carry this. The love you have to give is the most valuable thing in your life, more valuable than anything you are building, anything you are accumulating, anything you are working toward. And it is available to be given right now, tonight, before the last 10 minutes arrive and make everything else irrelevant. In the comments, I want to ask you something. What is the unsaid thing? Not who it is for, just what it is. One sentence. I am proud of you. I am sorry. Thank you for staying. I should have called more. Whatever it is that you have been holding, write it in the comments. And then go say it to the person who needs to hear it. I'll be reading every one. My name is Dr. Edward Carver. I'll see you in the